Hey there, fellow viewers. Welcome back to our channel. Today we have an urgent topic to discuss, the de-dollarization of the world. As you may know, the dollar has long been seen as a pillar of monetary stability around the globe. Did you know that the US dollar represents about 60% of the value of all the currencies in the entire world? It's been the last known superpower of the US, but the times are changing. Yes, that's right. The dominance of the American dollar is facing challenges, and it's coming to an end.
Vladimir Putin announced this week that Russia will begin using the Chinese yuan.
Now the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have announced plans to develop a new currency. Their goal is to reduce reliance on the US dollar and other Western currencies.
Smart foreigners, and there are some, believe it or not, start to dump the US dollar. Why? Because the US dollar was no longer a reliable store of value.
Our currency is crashing and will soon no longer be the world standard.
Stop using the dollar to curb Western dominance. That's the message from a top Iranian official.
In today's video, we'll explore the reasons behind this shift and what it means for the future of global finance. Currencies like the euro and the Chinese yuan are gaining momentum, threatening the dollar's long-standing supremacy. The world economy is evolving, and the dollar's status as the sole global superpower is being questioned. But fear not, because we're here to dissect the facts, analyze the trends, and bring you the latest insights on the future of the American dollar. So, if you're interested in the world of finance and want to stay ahead of the game, make sure to hit that subscribe button and don't forget to like, share, and comment below with your thoughts on the future of the American dollar. So, you know how countries like China, Russia, Brazil, India, and South Africa are teaming up to create their own alternatives to the global reserve currency, which is technically the US dollar? Yeah, people are calling it the de-dollarization of the world. It's a big deal, probably one of the most important financial events happening today. I'll explain it to you. Basically, a world reserve currency is the currency that countries use for international transactions and hold as reserves. It wasn't always the US dollar, though. Before the US became the dominant world reserve currency, other countries like France and Great Britain held that status at different times. But then, in 1944, the US dollar became the world reserve currency through the Bretton Woods Agreement. So it's been about 100 years since the US has had that status. But according to billionaire Ray Dalio, who studied this stuff, it tends to change every 94 years or so. Crazy, right? So we're already past the expiration date, and now all this is happening out of the blue. Let's talk about world reserve currency. Why does the world even need it, right? When a currency becomes a global reserve currency, it gets 3 superpowers. First, stability for international trade. You need a common language and currency that everyone can agree on to trade with each other. But countries don't trust each other's currencies because they don't know how much money the other country is printing. So it's like, how much is that money even worth? So, instead of using different currencies for international trade, countries could use a world reserve currency that's always backed by something stable and valuable. This would make the country with the world reserve currency a big player in investing because everyone likes to use stable money, and right now that's the US dollar. The world also needs to have a stash of dollars called foreign exchange reserves, but not every country uses all of it. So they invest the leftover dollars in things like US treasuries and securities from countries like Japan. China and the UK are some of the biggest holders of US assets through their foreign reserves. And overall, the US has a whopping $7 to $8 trillion worth of foreign investments. Just to put it in perspective, that's about the same as the entire GDP of Germany, the UK, and India combined. Another reason the US dollar is so powerful is that it's the only currency that can buy oil. This exclusive ability came about after World War II, when the US, being the only superpower left standing, created the Bretton Woods Agreement that tied all other currencies to the US dollar. Thus, the dollar became one of the world's most powerful currencies. However, a few decades later, in 1971, a significant event took place when the United States faced a financial crisis. President Richard Nixon made a historic announcement to the world that the US dollar would no longer be redeemable for 1 ounce of gold, as originally promised. So here's the deal. Back in 1971, The US decided that dollars could only be used to pay off debt, and they've been doing this for decades to get favorable foreign policy deals. But why didn't other countries just switch back to using their own currency when the US ran out of gold? Well, it turns out that in 1945, President Franklin D. Roosevelt made a secret deal with the King of Saudi Arabia during a wartime meeting. The US promised to protect Saudi Arabia in exchange for exclusive rights to develop oil from there. This created the petrodollar, which means that if any country wanted to buy oil, they needed to use US dollars. And that's why every US president since then has been cozying up to Saudi Arabia to maintain those relationships. The power and leverage obtained through the petrodollar have enabled the US to assert its dominance over other countries, controlling their access to energy, which is their lifeblood. However, this global dominance has not always been without controversy, as it has been used to exercise control over other nations. But, you know what's interesting? Some countries are rebelling when that happens, especially the ones that can produce their own energy. That's why we're seeing these relationships falling apart and new alliances being formed to challenge the dominance of the US dollar. But hold up. If you actually check the value of the dollar today, it's actually going up. It's somewhere near the highest point in the last 20 years. So why are people saying it's going down when the price is going up? Well, there are a couple of reasons for that other than just the price. If you look at the amount of dollars held worldwide, that number is gradually decreasing. Another reason is that the US just reminded the world how powerful the US dollar can be by using it against countries like Russia, freezing their dollar wallets and foreign exchange reserves, and threatening to aid Ukraine. And because of that, countries are teaming up and forming their own alliances with the help of Russia, which is providing the energy. And you know what? All of this has been happening behind the scenes for a really long time now. Back in 2000, for example, the UN allowed Iraq to sell oil in euros instead of dollars, and by 2007, Iran completely stopped selling oil in dollars. Pretty crazy, right? In 2014, Russia and China forged a deal to bypass the use of US dollars in their bilateral trade, signaling a shift away from the reliance on the dollar. This was followed by Iran and China, who also abandoned the dollar in their $400 billion investment agreement. India and Japan subsequently joined forces with Russia and Iran, and other countries followed suit, creating a growing list of nations moving away from the dollar. More recently, China and Saudi Arabia have joined hands to establish an alternative to the petrodollar, known as the petro-yuan, which has gained attention in the news. Alliances such as the BRICS nations, representing a substantial portion of the global GDP at 31.5%, are also gaining strength as more countries express interest in joining. Even the Federal Reserve's Jerome Powell has acknowledged the possibility of multiple world reserve currencies. So some people think the US dollar might be in trouble right now. Is it really happening? Or is it just sensationalized news for clicks and sales? Well, there's some truth to it, but it's not the whole story. Before you start freaking out about the end of the dollar, let's take a closer look. Turns out, people have been predicting the end of the dollar for decades. I found articles from as far back as 1975 talking about it. So, it's important to do your own research and not fall for hype. Let me show you a couple of examples I found, like one from 2004 warning about the disappearing dollar, or another from 2006 about the dollar's declining dominance. It's been a topic of discussion for years, and there are probably even older articles saying the same thing. It's true that various countries and entities have been attempting to replace the dollar as the dominant global currency for a long time. However, there are differing opinions on whether this will actually happen and how long it might take. Some argue that even if a shift occurs, it will likely happen over an extended period of time. Evidence supporting this argument can be seen in charts depicting the share of global transactions in dollars versus other currencies over the past 35 years. While the Chinese yuan may be growing, it is at the expense of the euro and the Japanese yen rather than the dollar, which remains remarkably stable in comparison. In summary, while discussions about the end of the US dollar as a global currency have been ongoing for years, the reality is complex and nuanced. It's important to consider multiple perspectives and examine evidence before drawing conclusions or succumbing to sensationalism in the media. The dollar's status as the world's dominant currency remains, despite efforts by other currencies to gain influence. So you might have seen some charts and videos showing that central banks are reducing their holdings of US dollars, which could make it seem like the dollar is getting weaker. But here's the thing. Most of that reduction happened during the 2008 global financial crisis, when everyone was unsure about what would happen. But if you actually look at the value of the dollar itself, it's actually going up. That's because the Federal Reserve is increasing something called the Federal Fund Interest Rate, which is making it attractive for foreign investors to put their money into treasury bonds. This is actually making the dollar stronger. So, despite some ups and downs, the US is still seen as an economic powerhouse of stability, and that's not changing anytime soon based on the data I could find. So, based on history, whenever there's a change in the world reserve currency, it usually happens during a big conflict. But who knows? Maybe this time it'll be different. One thing's for sure though, nobody really knows what would happen to the economy. Some say the US would lose its ability to export dollars, which could lead to higher inflation like we saw during the pandemic. Others think commodities like gold would skyrocket, and we might go back to the gold standard, but those are usually the folks trying to sell you gold. Then there are those who talk about hyper-Bitcoinization, but again, they're usually trying to sell you Bitcoin. And some people go all out and say it would be the end of the world as we know it. That's probably the most extreme opinion out there, but hey, it's the one that gets the most internet views. So who knows what'll really happen? It's all a bit of a wild ride. But before you start packing your bags and learning a new language, think about this. Out of the 750 currencies that have been around since the 1700s, only about 20% of them are still kicking today. All currencies have their ups and downs, and the US dollar is no exception. Sure, we're seeing some changes right now, but it's not like the dollar is disappearing overnight. In fact, most global trade still happens in dollars. So even if it does happen, it's going to be a slow process, maybe even taking decades or longer. So take a deep breath and don't panic just yet. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more informative content. Thanks for watching.